Bonsoir tout le monde. Je m'appelle Jean-Charles Lavallée, je suis le représentant d'ICA. ICA, c'est l'Institut interaméricain pour la coopération en agriculture au Costa Rica. Je suis représentant canadien, donc je suis basé au Canada. Changement climatique, une très grande priorité pour tous nos pays membres et pour l'ICA. Et donc, dans le programme, vous allez voir, il y a 5 conférenciers. Il y en a un de Rome, de FAO, qui ne peut plus être là. Et malheureusement, Cécile doit partir dans 5-6 minutes, alors on va lui donner le droit de parole immédiatement. Je reviendrai après. Cécile.
Merci beaucoup, Jean-Charles. Vraiment, je suis très, très heureuse d'être ici et de partager ce panel avec ces distingués invités. Merci aussi pour l'organisation en 2 langues, en français et en anglais. Donc, je m'appelle Cécile Martin-Phipps, je suis la directrice de l'Institut de la francophonie pour le développement durable. Et cet institut est basé à Québec, donc personne n'est au courant ou très rarement. Cet institut rayonne sur 88 États et gouvernements membres et notamment l'Ontario fait partie de l'organisation de la francophonie. Alors que faisons-nous, notamment sur cette thématique? Nous informons et sensibilisons en français justement aux thématiques d'avenir comme l'agriculture durable. Nous formons aussi nos populations et nos gouvernements sur tout ce qui est thématique de demain, enjeux de demain. Notamment, par exemple, nous avons prochainement à Montréal, comme vous le savez, la conférence sur la biodiversité, avec les négociations qui sont attendues et qui sont très importantes en décembre, puisqu'on prévoit l'adoption d'un futur cadre mondial pour la biodiversité. Eh bien, nous donnons les outils à nos négociateurs et négociatrices francophones, justement pour pouvoir négocier en tout état de cause sur les différents enjeux. Et troisièmement, on est un peu l'étincelle, on donne cette étincelle en tout cas à nos pays membres, de voir concrètement comment ça se traduit sur le terrain. Et c'est ça que j'aimerais vous présenter aujourd'hui. On a un projet que nous sommes en train de lancer qui s'appelle le projet Nexus. Ce projet justement part du principe qu'aujourd'hui il faut qu'on arrête de travailler en silo. Le climat d'un côté, la biodiversité de l'autre, l'agriculture, l'eau. On travaille tous en silo, chacun a sa petite conférence, mais finalement personne ne se parle. Or ça ne peut pas continuer. Et sur le terrain, ça ne fait strictement aucun sens. On voit bien que ce qu'on fait en termes d'agriculture durable a un impact sur les sols, donc sur le climat, donc sur l'eau, doit être économe en énergie parce qu'on parle de pompes solaires par exemple. Donc tout ça doit être effectivement imbriqué. Et ce projet vise à 3 objectifs en fait. Le premier, c'est véritablement de faire remonter ces bonnes pratiques parce que vous en avez ici en Ontario, il y en a au Québec, il y en a au Sénégal, il y en a au Vietnam, il y en a un peu partout en francophonie, mais on n'est pas forcément au courant de ces bonnes pratiques. Et souvent, ce sont des pratiques très locales, des petites pratiques, pas forcément de la grosse industrie, qui a besoin justement de remonter. Donc ça, c'est le premier objectif de ce projet, faire remonter ces bonnes pratiques. Donc si vous en avez, s'il vous plaît, envoyez-les nous. Ça, c'est la première chose. Deuxièmement, on aimerait vraiment former aussi tous nos pays francophones à ces nouvelles pratiques, justement, que nous appelons Nexus, pour faire évoluer, justement, les pratiques agricoles dans nos pays francophones, pour aller de l'avant sur, à la fois en matière de changement climatique, mais aussi d'agriculture durable pour le futur. Et ça répond aussi aux enjeux, bien sûr, de sécurité alimentaire. Et enfin, sur le terrain, nous souhaitons soutenir les petites recherches, les recherches et développements, mais vraiment à petit niveau. La plupart de la recherche et développement qui va être mise en œuvre sur le terrain, ici, comme dans la plupart de nos pays francophones en développement, sont des recherches qui sont en fait de la bonne pratique. De la bonne pratique parfois ancestrale, qu'on a oubliée, et qu'il faut reprendre en main. Donc voilà, mon appel aujourd'hui à vous, c'est sachez que la francophonie sur le développement durable est à Québec et on serait ravis de parler avec vous. 2, si vous avez des bonnes pratiques en termes d'agriculture, changement climatique, biodiversité, eau, faites-le nous savoir et faites-les remonter. Merci.
Merci Cécile.
Merci bien.
Je suis désolé que tu dois partir.
Oui, je crois que je vais partir dans 5 minutes, mais vas-y.
D'accord.
Je vais rester 5 minutes.
OK. Bon, alors, vous voyez le thème, donc c'est la sécurité alimentaire, c'est les changements climatiques Et j'aimerais quand même prendre une minute pour vous expliquer un peu, parce qu'il y a un peu de confusion souvent. Les gens ne comprennent pas trop le terme sécurité alimentaire. Ils pensent souvent à salubrité, en fait. Et la sécurité alimentaire, c'est la disponibilité des aliments, c'est l'accès économique, c'est la pauvreté, donc c'est l'accès physique, c'est l'utilisation, c'est la malnutrition. Et dans le monde entier, en ce moment, les Nations Unies disent que c'est à peu près 828 millions de gens qui vivent quotidiennement d'insécurité alimentaire. Le PAM, côté fin, là, les gens qui survivent, c'est 345 millions. C'était 135 millions avant COVID. Donc, c'est pire. Même l'espérance de vie a baissé de 2 ans. C'est grave, là. Et donc, l'insécurité alimentaire, au Canada, il y en a. Selon les Nations Unies, il n'y en aurait pas parce qu'il y a trop de bouffe disponible. En fait, on a 12 de la population qui vit d'une insécurité alimentaire. Donc, en fait, le sujet de changement climatique, ce qui vous intéresse peut-être, c'est, pour vous donner un portrait, le système alimentaire mondial, en termes de gaz à effet de serre, c'est à 16,5 milliards de tonnes. L'agriculture, c'est à peu près 7,5. Au Canada, l'économie en entier, c'est 730 millions. Pas les milliards, là, millions. Et l'agriculture, c'est à peu près 10 c'est 73 millions de tonnes. Donc, ce n'est pas un grand contributeur, mais on est un leader aussi dans nos actes, dans ce qu'on fait. Et là, on a des gens très intéressants. I'm going to switch to English now for the interpreters. We have 3 strong thought leaders here with Cécile to offer us their thoughts on solutions, what their organizations are doing, their challenges in productivity, their challenges on reducing our environmental footprints, how to remain profitable. Those are all things we're going to be exploring today in the next 38 minutes. Maybe I'd like to have the next 3 panelists, starting with Clyde, introduce themselves and maybe offer a quick idea on their priority actions in terms of attacking climate change.
Sure. So I'm Clyde Graham. I'm Executive Vice President at Fertilizer Canada. It's the trade association for all the fertilizer companies in Canada, the companies that manufacture fertilizer, but also that export it, distribute it, and actually sell it to farmers at the farm gate. More than about 16 years ago, our industry realized that we were behind the curve on sustainability, particularly in terms of our farmer customers who use our product in Canada. And we decided to develop a program and we work very closely with our US counterparts on this, to assist farmers and the people who advise those farmers and give them the framework to address sustainability and in particular climate change. That program is called 4R Nutrient Stewardship, and it is based on 4 key principles of using the right source of fertilizer at the right rate, the right time, and the right place. And using that system, farmers can reduce it. Well, first of all, they can increase their efficiency and profitability, but at the same time, they can reduce the emissions of greenhouse gases that occur with modern crop production. So I'll stop.
Thanks. OCP.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mehdi Filali. I'm Vice President of OCP, of Farmer Solutions at OCP Africa. OCP Africa is a subsidiary of OCP Group that has been created to support the sustainable transformation of the agriculture in continent. OCP Group, as you know, is a manufacturer and distributor of fertilizers, but we do much more than that to support the agriculture and especially in Africa. We are working on a scientific approach to develop in terms of R&D and innovations some specific solutions that will address the specificities in terms of soils, in terms of crops, in terms of agri-ecological conditions in the different areas of the continent. We are working also to develop an agriculture that is resilient to the climate change. And we have a good example of collaboration with the IDRC from Canada to develop a variety of quinoa that is specially adapted to an arid zone in Morocco, near to Ben Guerir, and bring this crop that is adapted to this agroecological condition and also is ensuring the food security for the population that is here. In Africa, we are working in several projects in terms of R&D, in terms of soil health, integrated soil health management, in terms of soil rehabilitations, because it's the first step as said Clyde, to increase the efficiency of the inputs and the fertilizers. And also we have some project on digital soil mapping, and we did 37 million hectares of soil mapping to first understand what are the needs in terms of nutrients for this soil, these crops, and then to address by producing specific product. So this is the, general overview of our activities supporting this agriculture, let's say, resilient to climate change and the efficiency of inputs.
Quinoa is a really important commodity in the Andean region.
Yes.
In South America, in the country we operate at ICA.
Yes.
It's a smart choice. Go, please.
Great, thank you, JC. My name is Khalid Bomba. I'm the managing director of a program called the Agrifood Transformation Agency Support Center, or TASC, which is under the World Food Program. But the genesis of TASC really grew out of an organization that I led in Ethiopia called the Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation Agency, or ATA, where I was the founding CEO about 12 years ago. And the ATA is a very unique organization based on learnings that came from Asia, where specialized government organizations were used to catalyze the transformation of entire economies or particular parts of economies in a very unique way, where a government institution created both capacity within the public sector, but more importantly, leveraged the private sector and civil society organizations to come together to solve critical national problems. And in Ethiopia, this ATA invested about $140 million, and a study by FAO found that $140 million generated an economic return of about $1.7 billion. So more than a 10x return on investment. And when other African countries saw this kind of a return on investment, they all said, well, this is really interesting, because one of the biggest issues that we face is public sector capacity that allows us to turn our strategies and our policies into results on the ground. That's what's really missing. The conversion of ideas at scale into major programs and flagships that deliver results for smallholder farmers and transform those smallholder farmers in Africa from subsistence-based producers to commercialized producers that are deeply linked into the food supply chain. So that's what we aim to do at TASC, is work directly with national governments in Africa and the ministries of agriculture in those countries to help them take those strategies and policies that they have into results on the ground.
Excellent. And smallholders are responsible for like 3/4 of the global food production. And I keep telling my students, women feed the world. They're the mainstay of the planet. And so the messaging here, I'll get back to solutions and ideas, but we now have our guest from Rome. And I'm happy that you're here, sir. I'd like to, if you can, please introduce yourself and maybe provide an idea of an initial priority solution that you can offer the crowd, the public here.
I assume you're talking to me?
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, good evening, if you're on this part of the world. I am Rachid Serraj from Morocco. And I don't know how much time I should take to present myself, but in a nutshell, I am an agronomist by training, both in France and US, and then spent about a decade with the CJR institutions. So these are the international research centers, IRI in the Philippines, ICRISAT in India, and ICARDA in the Middle East. And about another decade with the FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization, both here in Rome and also in Cairo. And I'm working now at the University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco as the head of strategy. So I'm glad to be with here. I can recognize some familiar faces out there. Mm-hmm. And you're asking me a question about solutions, but I think we should first see what's the problem. So I guess we're talking about agriculture, smallholders, climate change, and all that. So guess what? I'm just coming out of a very long day here in Rome, where we are having the Science and Innovation Forum, It has started on Monday and it will go until Friday. So 5 days of, and this is the first time this is happening. I must say that this is really unprecedented and first time that we're putting science and innovation at this scale. And today, I don't want to be reporting to you what all of we've heard and we've been discussing, but we're just coming out of a session discussing the science, innovation, and policy interface. Of course, when we talk about solutions, the scientists all around the world, we talked about the CGIAR and others, academia, the NARS, all over the continents are working, especially if we're talking about climate change, because the time is going very quickly. We're running out of time, basically, both in terms of mitigation and adaptation. Agriculture is both a contributor in the climate, but also one of the collateral damages, let's say, and especially if you go to the developing countries. And here, I have in mind specifically the conditions in Africa.
Right.
So Africa, as you all know, has contributed very little in climate change effects and CO2 emissions. And they are the first ones to suffer today from all the consequences. You name it, about drought, floodings, all those threats and severe conditions and extreme events that limit productivity and they pose a serious threat to food security. And this is for us, at least at UM6P and with many others, with FAO and international organizations,
right,
the top priority. Today we're facing this challenge and we have to find adequate solutions in the short time that we've got left. I don't know if this is addressing the question,
That's fine.
but
let's we'll get back to
the ball rolling. We can come back again.
Exactly. Perfect. Thank you so much. And what you've been hearing, this is something that we've been leading at ICA. We decided to push an sustainable agriculture in the Americas pavilion in Egypt at COP27 to bring more attention of agriculture to ministers of the environment. And so you're going to see a lot more language around being climate smart, being more responsible. And I'd like to hear the panel's ideas. We can start maybe this way on your thoughts on how we can incentivize the sector.
Mm-hmm. So, when we think about climate smart agriculture, I think there's probably three dimensions to it, of course. One is to ensure that we increase the income and productivity of the farmers themselves, and ideal in Africa. So it's always thinking about smallholder farmers, where in places like Ethiopia they account for over 90% of the production. The second is thinking about resilience of both livelihoods as well as the environment, and then lastly, it's about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Now, as we think about those three aspects of climate smart agriculture, I think there are three key issues that we struggle with or we think about. The first is the trade-offs that are necessary across those three dimensions, because unfortunately, there is no one silver bullet. And I think we've got to consider with data and evidence, what are the trade-offs in different interventions that could enhance one aspect or one pillar, but might have a negative consequence on the other, and how do we mitigate some of that? So I think that's one thing. The second is, as Rachid mentioned, it is a system problem. It is not a one-dimensional silo issue where it's the Ministry of Agriculture or the Ministry of Environment. So there needs to be an opportunity not just to collaborate, but really integrate solutions. And how do you integrate? That's not very easy to do. And I think a system integration approach is a skill set that I think is missing when we consider these kinds of issues. And then lastly, it's about working at scale. And in many countries in Africa, working at scale is somewhat difficult just because the partners that we're engaging with are really working on pilot projects that are really fantastic when you think about them from addressing a particular issue in a village or in a community, but trying to work at a national scale across a system is fundamentally challenging. It really isn't easy in countries like Ethiopia or Kenya or Senegal. So those three issues of how do you build the capacity to work at scale? How do you build the capacity to work from a system integration point of view, and then understand the trade-offs that are necessary so that you can mitigate against them, I think are the three key issues that we try to think about from a climate-smart agriculture point of view.
Excellent. From an OCP point of view,
I think there is the R&D part to develop this innovation and this solution adapted to the local context. But to put this on the field, especially if we talk about Africa, you know that 70% of the farmers are smallholder farmers. So we need to have this comprehensive approach to empower the farmer. And the climate smart agriculture should be completely integrated in this approach to develop the activity for farmer. So first thing that the farmer is missing, access to quality input. Second thing, he should be advised also how to manage, to improve the situation of his soil, how to manage the water, how to manage the salinity, the acidity. You know that 65% of the soils of the cultivated areas in Africa are suffering from erosion and from acidity. So this is a big issue. And also, we should train the farmers on the best agronomic practices, including this climate smart agriculture. And then we should facilitate also the offtake, the finance, and the development of the activity of the smallholder farmers. So it should be completely, I think, integrated in this holistic approach to bring added value to the farmer, to show him that he can increase his yield, his revenue, but also by applying good agronomic practice that are linked to climate smart agriculture.
excellent.
Climate change is a global issue, and so is food security. There are, I think, as you said, there's going to have to be trade-offs. Half of the world's food comes from fertilizer, is responsible for it, and we're going to have to produce even more food on the same land as the population rises to close to 10 billion people, as is projected. When we look at this problem, we see that a seed of corn or maize, wheat, other crops that are planted in the soil, it does not know whether that seed doesn't know whether it's being planted in a 5,000-acre farm in Canada or a 2-acre farm in Africa. The science and the agronomy is very simple. Scale, though, is obviously a big difference. When we designed the program for 4Rs, we designed it in a way that it would be flexible enough to work for Canadian farmers, US farmers, and farmers in developing countries like Africa. Our ambition is to give African farmers the same access to knowledge and technology scaled for a different system that Canadian farmers use to grow food. We're making tremendous progress in Canada, and we have a 4R solution project in Africa. It's in Ethiopia, Ghana, and Senegal. And our ambition is to have ultimately that same program available throughout the continent of Africa.
So what you're going to find is that, and you may have known this already, we're talking about 9.5 billion people by 2050. There's going to be more pressure on the Americas, on Canada to produce more. We can't really extensify. It's not like there's a lot more ag land available. So we have to intensify. We have to do it smart. We have to do more. And so I would like Rachid's point of view. Rachid, can you hear us?
Yes.
Please.
Yeah, well, quickly, I would like to contribute 3 points. The first one, as we speak about CSA, climate smart agriculture, this to me back in the work that has been done by CCAS. This is a mega program of the CGIAR on climate change and food security, about $3.5 billion over 12 years. This was the most comprehensive program on climate change, mostly in Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So I don't want to go back in details because all has been documented and published. But the key point here, what has been done, for instance, on climate-smart agriculture is moving it on the ground, because beyond the principles and the overall guidelines and all that, I think we all know, when they, as they say, when the rubber hits the road at the country level. And here, the CCAS has done a great job in profiling countries. So you have specific country profiles on CSA. And the key message here is that what works, for instance, in Zambia or Malawi might not work in Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire. So we've got to be specific. And this is really key. We've got to go out of that vision of there is somewhere, I think as Khalid was also saying, there is no magic bullet. We've got to be looking at the specific context and looking at the adequate solutions on CSA. What might work, and I have a lot of examples that are published. I don't want to go into details. The obvious one, for instance, is conservation agriculture. Beyond the debate, there are conditions where conservation ag works, and there are conditions where it doesn't, because you have to take, and not only the technology, but you have to look at the socio-economic and the policy dimension. The second message is about what has been said about the nexus. And this morning itself, I was in a session broadcasted from Cairo about this same issue, because preparing for the COP27, and I heard the minister, the Egyptian minister in charge of water, and I was really happy to hear the message, because the guy is coming from an academic profile. He does understand what we now call the nexus. So the nexus is about linking energy, water, and food, because we cannot resolve these issues on a side. To resolve the food issues, for instance, at the Middle East, we're really in a lab where we're learning a lot very quickly about this. We need to connect the dots. If we don't find the solutions in terms of energy and water and desalination, all that, and I think we're going to have some nice discussions at the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. But just to say that these are not, again, single pathways or silos. We have to take that complexity at all. And the final word, not to be too long, is the third one, and that's again the message I've heard all day today here in Rome, is integration, nesting, and integration again. We cannot go with the single dimensions or single approaches. We have to start putting our acts together. That means academia, private sector, civil society, international organizations. And I think building the momentum for doing this and for linking the science to policy. And I must say, to conclude, that there are some good signs of hope on this pathway.
Excellent, Rachid. Thanks. I wanted to let the crowd know that in Canada, we tend to think of no-till practices or beneficial management practices as strong ways of managing our land. And the farmers are land stewards, and they're doing a fantastic job. But doesn't always, you can't tailor always what you're doing, and which is what Rachid's point is, that, tropical agriculture is very different from Canadian agriculture. So in the last 15 minutes, what I really want to bring attention to the panel is for them to discuss about the science, about innovation, about technologies, and to be solutionary. So for me, it's not just about solutions. It's about visionary, revolutionary, solutionary, and bringing solutions to the sector that are long-term, that in an integrative way. And you've heard that in the last series of questions that they all talked about integration. And so on the food safety side, we do a lot of One Health. So here we maybe want to do One Environment. Maybe we can start with OCP.
Sorry, just if you can...
Science, innovation, and technology.
Yes.
The future, current practices, how to foster adoption, investments required.
I think we have to work on a multi-partnership approach. We have to work with the international institutions, with local institutions, and each one should, bring its added value in this R&D. The R&D is very important to be adapted to the local specificities of each location, of each region. But it should not stay as academic tool. it should come to the field. It should be, deployed at the farm level. And because we have also a lot of R&D that has been done sometimes and that are not used by the farmer. If I speak about Africa, the continent that I know and where I am working.
So what are the challenges? Why isn't it adopted?
The challenges is that we should make these bridges between the research institute and between the field and between the extension. And also in the research that we do, we should not do research, for doing academical research, but we should do research that will be applied on the field, and we should also bring the voice of the farmer in the research. We should integrate farmer associations, cooperatives, at when we do the research at this level, because sometimes we can, for example, develop some product that will be very interesting in terms of scientifically, but the farmer will not have the willingness to pay or to take part of this product. So I think for me, it's very important to develop the research, to develop a research that will be adapted to each agroecological conditions, to the farmer practices, to each location, but also to make this research easily deployable on the ground and used by the farmer.
And you were tailing one of those best practices in Nigeria.
Yes, we have different projects. We did a project with, we're supporting ATA with Khalid Bomba to do this soil fertility map. It was very successful because the voice of the farmer was taken upstream. And just to explain you about this experience, so ATA did this soil fertility map with the support with different stakeholders. Then we have developed a specific formula that will fit with the needs of the soil and the crops. And then when we did the demonstration, we have shown an increase of yield between 30 to 40% for maize, for example, with a product that is less expensive for farmer than the previous one. So the farmer was very happy, and he was consuming more fertilizers. He was increasing and developing his activity. And this is a good experience of what can be done. And it was successful also because of the work of ATA to bring the voice of the farmer at upstream, not at the last step of the process, but at the beginning of the process.
Excellent. Maybe you want to follow up with the ATA?
Yeah, sure. And building on Mehdi's point, when we think about innovation, the core of any innovation is data and information. If you don't have that data, then what are you building that innovation off of? So the example that Mehdi pointed out, in Ethiopia for 30 years, farmers were getting the same recommendations for fertilizer across the entire country, irrespective of whether they were planting wheat or maize or sesame, whether they were planting on red soil or black soil. It doesn't matter whether you're planting at sea level or 3,000 feet above. It was 100 kgs of DAP and 100 kgs of urea for 30 years. Now, clearly that doesn't make sense because the soil nutrients are different from place to place, and the crop needs are going to be different as well. And over 30 years of extracting these nutrients from the soil, we realized we've got to analyze the soil to ensure that we're giving farmers the right fertilizer recommendations. And we ended up collecting over 150,000 soil samples across the entire country. And initially, when we went to collect soil from farmers' fields, farmers were incredibly resistant because they felt as though we wanted to know what was in the soil so that the good land was going to be confiscated by the government. By the end of the project, when they realized what we were doing, our experts that were there to collect soil were actually greeted as almost liberating heroes. And cattle were being slaughtered when they came. And we thought, no, please don't do that. That's not the point here. But to Mehdi's point, not only were farmers getting good fertilizer recommendations that increased their yields, the fertilizer recommendations that they were getting actually allowed them to replenish the nutrients that were missing from the soil. So the soil became much more productive, much healthier as a result of that. So that data allowed an innovation around better fertilizer recommendations. We did the same exact thing with groundwater, where we mapped over 200,000 kilometers square in Ethiopia to understand how much groundwater there existed at less than 30 meters below the surface, and then the amount that could be extracted sustainably over any period of time, so that we avoided what happened in India, which was that groundwater levels were depleted down to less than more than 150 meters below sea level. So data and information allowed us to provide recommendations to farmers, and actual industries were built off of these. So in Ethiopia, when it came to fertilizer, OCP entered into a joint venture with the Ethiopian government to build a fertilizer factory. When it came to groundwater, the mapping itself, after it was done, the water extraction was small and medium-sized enterprises. Pumps were being built by local enterprises. So entire industries were emerging in local communities to service farmers on drilling. The actual irrigation equipment had to either be imported or produced in the country. So this is an ecosystem that developed out of the data that we were able to map.
I love it. Great economic development. Bit of like a canola success in Canada. Billion-dollar industry, several $billion.
Right.
Any examples from other countries in Africa like that?
Well, the three countries that we're working in, Senegal, Ethiopia, and Ghana, we've had tremendous success in working with farmer-owned cooperatives to unleash the power of local business smarts and innovation, to be better at purchasing inputs like fertilizer, but also to market the crops. Because if farmers are buying fertilizer, for example, at world prices, but they're selling their crops and their produce at local prices, they're not going to prosper. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do. The other thing, previous panel, women, 50% of all the smallholders we're touching in Africa are women, not only as farmers, but as extension workers and also in leadership position in cooperatives, because the majority of smallholders in the world are women, the people who are actually doing the farm work, and we've got to unleash that potential. I think the other thing is related to the co-ops. Africa, when I go to Africa, people are very excited to see the private sector engaged with Africa. I think Canada's private sector has an enormous opportunity in agriculture in Africa to play a leadership role. And I think people in Africa, business in Africa, farmers in Africa are very keen to see that. And there's lots of room. There's great companies in Africa, and I think there's more room for more countries to come in and assist Africa in achieving its potential.
And you see that from Canada too. There's a lot of the leadership here. I work in the Americas, and a lot of the member countries look to Canada for leadership on food safety or on yields or on gene banks or agriculture practices, regulations. Rachid, I didn't give you a chance to respond. Do you have any examples that you'd like to show in terms of best practices or lessons learned?
Yeah, well, the example I'd like to highlight is the work we are doing now at Mohammed VI Polytechnic University, because our ambition actually is trying to contribute with many other partners in resolving some of these development issues in Africa. So name it, food security, hunger, and all that. And we are developing a strategy that looks at agriculture, water, and climate as the key issues. We are, this is building, actually, our approach is not to start anything from scratch. And this is really important. I mentioned earlier, for instance, the work done by CCAS and CSA and all that. So we start from there. We try to start from there. So working with the World Bank and other development agencies that are have been on the ground already over decades working on these issues and trying to put our value addition into that. So I can mention just very quickly the themes that were our focus. Our number one focus right now is climate change, for the reasons I mentioned earlier, because it is the bottleneck for rising ag productivity, and we have to look beyond what we are doing now. We have to look at 2030, 2040, 50. We're doing a bit of foresight, seeing what's tomorrow's going to look like for the continent. Of course, we're going to look at all the trends. And so focus on climate, building on what has been done by CCAS and others. Our number two priority is the science of phosphorus, for the reasons also that are obvious, because the continent is still suffering from chronic soil fertility problems, and not only in Ireland, but mainly phosphorus. And we believe that this is with integration with what OCP Africa is doing on the ground, we're trying to bring also the science here, and we are building partnership in US, for instance, with STEPS and many other programs on this to become the hub for science of phosphorus. Number three is the water, because we've mentioned it. We are now sitting in a region where water scarcity is becoming the issue. I told you just about the nexus in Egypt and the COP and all that. So this is one top of priority. And of course, we are focusing also on sustainable intensification with the CGIAR, because the CGIAR has been active for 5 or 6 decades, working on the staple crops, so rice, maize, wheat, and others, pulses. And we're trying to bring value addition there also. And there is a lot to do now to raise the productivity, because there is a huge yield gap in Africa. And that's what we're trying to go at. Of course, we're also working on the enabling environment and tools. We're putting a lot of efforts in digital agriculture, digitalization. And at UM6P, we're really fortunate to have infrastructure. We have one of the biggest data centers in the continent, and trying to harness all the power of digital ag, digital extension, to move these grounds and on the ground. We also have one of the best ecosystems for innovation and youth entrepreneurship, because we do believe that the future, for instance, in Africa, lies in youth, and we're putting our focus on education and capacity building, so that we can prepare the future generations. This is basically to say that we don't have only to try to resolve yesterday's problem today, but we have to look forward, and we have to see what's coming up. And in Africa, as you know, demography is changing, climate changing, the geopolitics also has a big dimension, and we have to prepare a comprehensive set, building the partnerships. So this is, again, very, very important, not to start anything from scratch, but working with all those that have been on the ground for decades. So that's what I would like.
Rachid. Yeah, that's excellent. I fully agree. We need to farm forward. We need to think of the future youth. We often view them as future leaders, but you all are leaders as well. You're all agents of change. Every food you eat has an environmental footprint. Every bite you eat transforms the food system. You have a direct impact from demand. We've been talking about supply a lot, but it's meeting demand. And so the population growth will be about 267-ish, according to the Lancet. After that, population will start declining. So we really have to be responsible and smart for the next few years until then, because we're keeping pressure and more pressure on the system. And there will be more climate change impacts, more gas. We have to be part of the solution. Agriculture is part of the solution. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to finish up in 30 seconds with a key message for you. Please.
Sure. The key message for me is that it's not the what, but the how. I think we know what the problem is. We know what the solutions are. I think the question is, how do we implement these solutions at scale in a contextualized way for each country where we work?
Thank you.
I would say my final message will be, we should do, agriculture, depending on the area where we are, we should develop specific crops. We should not, produce some crops that are consuming in terms of water in areas where there is a lack of water. So we should also come back to certain crops original crops of Africa, we call them the orphan crops, that are adapted to the agroecological conditions and also that can support the food security. I think in the approach of the development of the agriculture, we should take in consideration this agroecological condition.
Yeah. Canada's fertilizer industry is working closely with the government of Canada, with provinces, farmers in Canada on the issue of climate change. And we also want to thank the government of Canada for its sponsorship of our program in Africa, but there's also private sector funding, and it's a private-public partnership, and I think that's very important. The last thing I'd say is that while our project focused on women and their future in agriculture, Africa is the youngest continent in the world. We've worked with 4-H clubs to provide knowledge to high school students about community gardens, about the fields that they work in, and they are amazing. And I think Africa is in good hands with the youth that are there, as long as we can empower them.
Tremendous potential, yeah. Rachid, please.
Yeah, I've heard someone in meetings here in Rome, actually, not to mention names, an old president of IFDD, saying that we have been meetings and events and a lot of talk, while the situation on the ground hasn't changed much. And actually, in terms of food security, sometimes it's got that way around. So for me, the key, and this is again not only me, a lot of people now coming to this conclusion. Right. We've got to walk the talk, because in terms of R&D, we don't need really to reinvent wheels. A lot has been done. We can sure build on that and look forward to what's coming our way in terms of foresight. But we've got to work. I mean, to walk the talk. I mean, for me, that's really the final message.
Thank you so much, Rachid. I'd like to thank the crowd for staying till the very end of day 3 of the forum. I'd like to thank the forum organizers, thank Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and I'd like to invite you to join me in thanking our panel.